Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. I would love for you to help us spread the word by leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And did you know you're a part of a global community? We have over 70 plus countries listening to the podcast. Today, I want to welcome Jamaica to the list of the 70 plus countries. My guest today is Satyam Kantamneni, and he is the Chief Experience Officer of the UXReactor. And in less than 7 years, they have become the fastest growing specialized experience design firm in the US, which is so cool, with over 50 plus employees spread over 3 continents. And what I love today is we're going to talk about his book, which is all about innovation and user experience. It's called User Experience Design, a Practical Playbook to Fuel Business Growth. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate the privilege.
Well, this is a cool topic, and we were talking about this beforehand, but our audience loves these types of topics, and I would love to just talk a little bit about your background personally and what inspired you to write this book.
I think a lot of the writing, the book itself was probably a culmination of the prior 15, 20 years of work that I put into this. To a large extent, I think there's a lot of design level work that's being done in the world, and design, unfortunately, is still perceived as a visceral skill. So a lot of my work and my study has been or has revolved around design, the intersection of design, business, and technology, and realized that there's not much written about it in that context, especially as user-centered design as a business multiplier. So that work is kind of what we ended up doing at my firm, and then a lot of those firms ended up a lot of the work ended up becoming techniques, and then we said we had to put it out there in public domain. So the book was a result of a lot of that thought process.
That's really cool. So I want to unpack something you said. So let's talk a little bit for a second about what does it mean for business to become user-centric, and then how does the work that you do, or maybe how does the book connect with some of that thought process?
So the foundational premise is when you are user-centered, you should always be on a hockey stick growth. That means you know who your user is, you know what the pain points are, and you're solving it every day that you exist. But that's not the case in many companies. They actually are struggling to kind of identify who their user is, what the pain point is, product market fit. And so that's kind of been the reality of what's happening. 40% of the products still and features still fail because of product market fit. And so that's kind of when you start studying that, you realize that, user centricity is often overused term that many people don't understand, and then they don't know how to deploy that. So that's kind of what is the premise overall. The book itself was like, what does user centricity mean? Do you know your user? How do you know your user? And talking to a user doesn't make you user centered. Talking to user, empathizing with them, understanding with them, being able to rattle out 5 things that they actually are really pained about is actually what user centricity is. That means there's a lot more deeper level of introspection that needs to go in. And so we created techniques around that, and we kind of said, let's publish that, because that, as a practice, as a consulting firm, we put a lot of those techniques in work, and we said, let's put it out there because there's only so many companies we can touch one by one. So let's just put it out there for others to leverage. But the premise is very simple, but again, very powerful.
That is powerful. And I think you're right. I think we have gone through a season where a lot of companies talk about being user-centric, but if we don't know where our customer is going, if we don't know what kind of content they're consuming, if we don't know what problems they're trying to solve or what they're thinking about, then we actually can't dig into the heart of what it means to really know our user. And so I do agree. We love to use the term, but are we actually digging down to the details and understanding that? I know that, when looking at kind of some of these user-centric ideas, a lot of people deploy empathy maps or persona exercises. Are those some of the things you use, and do you use anything different that maybe is not in that wheelhouse?
So we use those, and we use a few more than that. And I think these are artifacts. Artifacts. I mean, the same as asking, would you use Keynote or you use PowerPoint or use Google Slides? I think these are all mediums to communicate something.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'll maybe take a step back before I answer that question. And the step back is, I say, any leader out there, and I tell this, I coach a lot of the leaders, and I say, take 4 random people in your company and ask them these 4 questions. Who's the user that the company cares about? What are the top pain points of that user? What are you doing to solve those? And how do you know you have solved those? And then the first thing is, do you have answers for that? Most times you won't. But if you do, then are they consistent between the 4 random people that you're picking across the company? And that's where you kind of start putting a bar or a baseline. How user-centric are you? If everyone's saying the same thing, and if everyone is kind of very clear about what the pain points are, that means you're a user-centered organization. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the foundation aspect. Now, the point is, how do we kind of make sure that everyone gets much more empathetic to them? Obviously, a persona map, defining an empathy map. An empathy map in most cases. So we also talk about what we call something like an experience roadmap. That's a technique that kind of merges a lot of these things. And we also call that out in the book. It's a technique where we say, if your top user is, let's say you're a hospital and your top user is the caregiver of your patient, what's the journey that they go through? What is the different journey that they go through right before they become a patient, while they become a patient, while they're working with your patient, and continuing on? And what are the different pain points? What are the different insights you have? What are the measures that you're trying to kind of figure out to kind of get those pain points out? So what's your roadmap around a user and their experience? And every system in the world has multiple users. And if you have it for every user, then you actually are, very much in tune to be user-centered and then tracking towards that. But a lot of times these are also done in organizations that have this data. They're done in silos. And there's one person who knows that data in the company, and and no one knows who that one person is when they want it. And that's kind of where it's inefficient in a lot of ways, and smart stuff gets wasted.
Yeah, that's wise. I mean, I think it's maybe known by your product manager or something like that, but it's not necessarily, to your point, shared out. And if you were to walk around the organization and ask other people, they wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate what it is that that kind of checks those boxes, as you mentioned earlier. And so I think that it's not enough to do the work, right? It's not enough to know it in a silo. It's how do you cross the silos, and how is everybody thinking about the user, not just the product manager per se, but how are other people in the organization thinking about that? Whose job is it to do that? Like, whose job is it to break down those silos and educate?
If you ask me, I believe it's actually a role that doesn't exist in many companies. And the role is what I call the chief experience officer, at the same level as the chief marketing officer, reporting to the C-level of a company. And why is that the case? Because from a user's perspective, who's interacting with you and your system as a company, they don't care whether you are professional services, you are customer service, you are product. They think of all of that as a single experience. I'll give you a great classic example. I'm a gold, a loyalty member for one of the top airlines, which are based in Gulf. And I said, hey, by the way, I reached out to them on their chat, and I said, hey, I've not gotten credit for a certain flight. I spent 20 minutes with them, and they said, oh, that's a different department. Can you go to the website and do that? Now so most times organizations ship their organization structure to a user and say, go figure it out. That's crappy experience.
Yeah.
Most times you need to get departments to work across each other. Most times there should be a single owner of a user and their journey for a company. And that's why you need a separate role or a leader to drive that. Otherwise, it's just going to get bastardized under some leadership structure somewhere. And again, if the company believes that user centricity is that strategic imperative, in fact, I've seen so many value statements of companies says customer obsessed, user centered. That doesn't work if you actually don't put the mechanics in place. And then it's just inefficient as you see that. And again, to my point, your question, it's actually a role that doesn't exist, and it has to sit right at the C-level of a company.
Yeah, I think more about that, what you said, the chief experience officer, and how that is uncommon. It almost reminds me of when the chief product officer role began to come around and people started to think in that way, it is another level, it's another step, another rung that I think most people haven't realized is a necessity. But when you talk about these missed opportunities, it's brilliant. It makes perfect sense that there needs to be a seat at the table for someone who's owning the overall experience. And so that is such a gap. And not only is it a gap, but it does explain, and you're exactly right, it's not up to the customer to understand your org chart and how to move throughout your org chart. It's our job to flatten that as much as possible so they don't feel that at all. And they just feel the power of having a good experience, regardless of what problem we're trying to solve for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every time your users should feel that somebody thought about me and solved a problem, and that's magic. And any company that can ship magic on a consistent basis is only going to win it all.
What would you say when you think about structuring, right? So we kind of talked about some different types of roles. As we think maybe more like a futurist, how do you see org charts changing if the user experience role, if this chief, experience officer role is kind of implemented in organizations? How do you see org charts shifting and changing?
So I think org charts, there's a benefit of having functional organizations, a functional department. So I'm not saying that should evolve. What I'm saying is there should be a cohesion and incentivization around them. Unfortunately, the only group or the only department or the person that thinks across departments and says, what does my customer want and how do I make everyone work together, is typically the CEO or the CEO's office. And that's kind of where you start talking about, because you can't if you say product can't build it in a fast enough time, customers, success can't implement it fast enough. There's that element of how do you build an experience together. So if you're going to play the futuristic role, I would say they're the chief experience officer. They own every facet of a customer's journey. And then they say, again, for example, it's not always product, right? So it could be some parts, maybe professional services, some part of it could be customer support, some part of it could be, but in the journey, the whole company gets touched by, the company touches a customer. So kind of somebody who looks at it, says, these are all the pain points and I'm going to keep making it lesser and lesser and better, lesser and lesser painful, and then make it better. So that's how I would assume this would work. They're clear metrics. You have experience metrics. Your users have adoption metrics, satisfaction metrics, efficiency metrics, engagement metrics. You start looking at how do you going to drive that better. You also can look at that against your competition. So your metrics are there. Your teams are structured around that. Now, what are teams typically in the context of a chief experience officer? Again, I'd say it's not rocket science if you really look at really good systems like the military out there. They have a good intelligence team that's constantly looking for intelligence, and that's what your user research team is. You're kind of constantly understanding what the users want, what the pain points are, then taking that data and then activating that with a design team that's constantly iterating and experimenting. And design is not just a design team; it's actually engineering, product. Everyone's sitting there and kind of iterating on those. And then shipping it, and then continuously kind of making sure you're supporting and putting a support structure to that. So everything needs to come together on that end with common metrics. If you have metrics and your incentives in the right place, the functional organizations can still be activated.
So that leads me to the question of experience transformation. Let's spend a little bit of time just unpacking what is it and kind of why you think it's the next frontier of digital transformation.
I can give you so many examples. Let's take this analogy, right? So we went from saying, oh, the company, we need a website. And that was that generation. And from, okay, we need a website to interact. Then suddenly it's like, hey, why are we not being productive? Let's digitize everything. Let's kind of digital, automate, etc. So in the pursuit of digital transformation, a lot of people forgot that you still have to make technology easy to use, easy to understand, comprehend. You cannot train people. I mean, today, if you start looking at deep systems like automotive, healthcare, education, security, you just still have to train people on that. It's all digital, right? And the case in point is, I was trying to do an visa I was trying to go to a country, and then they said you need to put all your COVID data in one place, etc. And I was going with my family. It's all digitally transformed. It's all as they call it, zero contact, digitally transformed. But the experience was so painful because by the time I finished filling the first person data, and then I went into the second person, which is my family members, it could have replicated a lot of that information and said, the same flight. I'm not gonna say same, destination and origin. And but then it asked me to fill up again. By the time I filled the fourth one, I timed out. So you start again. So this is what I call the paradox of digitally transformed but experientially painful.
Wow.
And you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing that in citizen experiences. Yes, everything is digital. Go fill that up, and then you fill it up, and then you kind of are struck figuring out like, what the heck now? It's not experientially easy. Tax is the same way. I mean, if you ask IRS, it says that, hey, we are digitally transformed. You can upload your taxes anytime, anywhere. But it's painful to do that. And that is what when you start focusing on that pain, you actually will then, unlock the power of digital. And that's why I strongly believe that experience transformation is the next frontier of digital transformation for companies as they evolve.
So I think when you said IRS, everybody can relate to that experience. I was even thinking about how last year I was trying to pay a tax balance, and at no point could it actually tell me what my balance was. So I just had to overpay and then receive a check back from them. At no point did I ever actually know my time and date balance. It was the most frustrating experience I've ever had. And I kept checking back because the last thing you want to do is owe the IRS. So you're trying to make sure that you paid them properly. But yes, I mean, when you talk about experiential nightmares that are digital, I think that there are so many examples like the ones you use, IRS is another, that just drives home exactly what you're saying. Yes, you have it digitally, but the experience is terrible.
Absolutely. So we work with this automotive dealership company. It took 12 minutes to check in every time, an automotive dealership software, 12 minutes to check in every car that came into your dealership, right? And because it was experientially hard, you had to do one in this place. If you had to get a loaner car, you go somewhere else. Oh, you had the credit, I want to go somewhere else. Oh, we actually, need to see if there was a part available. I need to go somewhere else. That's, again, digitally, all on digital system. Everything. There's 12 different logins to 12 different digital systems. But that's not digital transformation. It has still a lot more. And by the time we finished building that experience, 2 minutes as all it took. And so just think about the same person can now check in 6 more cars than what they were doing right now. It's highly efficient, and it's error proof because the systems are getting smarter and smarter. But and you should just leverage the power of that.
So if you were to tell someone how you went from here to there, right, A to B with doing that, what would you say were just some of the maybe like 3 or 4 high-level principles that you use to help them take their time down in terms of the number of cars they had to check in? Like, what were some of just the grounding principles you used to help them make that transformation?
See, I think innovation comes by following the user. That's our fundamental premise, right? So, and in this case, we spent time observing service advisors, seeing how they work, what they were doing, where they were kind of waiting, where they were asking someone else, like, hey, do we have a loaner car? The other problem is, yeah, they have a loaner car, but where is the key? Who has the key? Because it went out yesterday. So you start noticing all these nuances, and you start documenting them, as you called an empathy map or a journey, like, oh, this is a pain point. They know that there's a car, but they don't know where the key is because that was returned yesterday. Oh, by the way, has it been cleaned up? Because these are not systemically tracked. These are vehicles in your own inventory. So, and is it ready for being loaned back? So you start observing the user. You start understanding the pain points. Then you say, what would the best experience that if I was to do it in a magic, I had a magic wand, and I said, what would I do if I could just magically create it? Then you kind of build out a prototype of an experience. Test it out, and then go back and say, how would this work? Honestly, to build an experience, the cost of experimentation today is a few $1,000s. It just takes time to sketch out an idea and go in front of someone and say, would this work? How would this work? And then prototyping that further would be tens of $1,000s to implement. Many companies kind of really go fast from like zero, like I have a problem. Somebody asked this a feature. I'm going to go engineer it, and then $1 million or $2 million later, identify it's hard to use, and then it doesn't get used. So many features you build are not getting used. So again, to answer the thing, you understand the user, you understand the journey, Then you design the thing, iterate on it, and then work with engineering to build it. That's as simple as it is, but that discipline is where many companies kind of fail. It's in military, there's a word called rank has its privilege, and unfortunately, in corporates, the senior person is like, I think this is the feature they want, or this customer told me they want it, so I want to give it to them because they're going to sign their next deal. That's not how you build software. You need to build it around a deep amount of patterns. And that if you see 10 users using it and you kind of see the pain kind of coming together, then you validate it with 10 other people and say, oh, okay, is this still a pain for you? And they say yes, then go for it and build it and you trade on it. And then when you launch it, absolutely it will work because you understood a pain and you solved it. And again, all of us in our own life can identify a couple of pains that someone can actually solve right now. We're willing to get money out of our pocket and give it to them. And that's basically that connection is the magic that it's simple, but needs to be kind of unlocked.
Yeah, it's simple, but not followed. And I think that's why so many companies are in the state they are. I even just think about the fact of what you were saying of pattern finding, right? Like, that's great that one person will write a check, but will 10 people, will 15, will 20 people write a check for that feature, for that added, product that we're going to put into process? Because sometimes bringing that product to market could cost more than what that person on surface is willing to stroke a check for. And so oftentimes, right, in sales, we're so ready to close that deal that we're not always looking at the fact that if this is not repeatable, we're actually creating technical debt. We are creating service challenges, right, to now service something that only one person is using. So it's N has to equal many. And if N doesn't equal many, then we shouldn't be building it. And so you're right. In so many organizations, the CEO makes it with a client, right idea, let's go build it, and then nobody wants it. And I've actually been brought in to turn those types of products around, and it was like, hey, that's great that we built this. Nobody cares, nobody cares. And so we have to start with, what do people care about? What is a problem that we're trying to solve right now, not in 10, 15, 20 years? And so this is brilliant. I love this. Talk to us about talk to us a little bit about your company and where we can locate your company, how we can find you, follow you, and then talk to us a little bit about where your book is available and just and what we'll get out of that as well.
Absolutely. So the book, let's start with the company, the UXReactor, the firm that I run. We call ourselves catalysts. We catalyze, the reaction through user-centeredness or user experience. We are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, headquartered in Pleasanton, with significant presence in the other parts of the world. Our prime focus has always been like unlocking product strategy through user-centered practices for B2B enterprises. That's been our core strength. We worked with a lot of large companies. In fact, there's a bunch of companies that focus around B2C. When we said, no, let's go after the meaty problems that, multi-user, multi-context, multi-systems bring to us. And that's kind of what we have spent the time over the last 8 years. The book itself is a lot of our techniques that we call them plays internally. Many times when people are trying to unravel the power of user-centeredness, we identified 27 different scenarios for that. And he said, how do you build how do I measure user experience? How do I build a team for user experience? How do I build an experience roadmap for every user that I care about? How do I even go and ask questions and build my empathy for a certain user? So these are all the how do I questions. So we had 27 how do I questions. And we said, let's kind of write that down and write a place on how we would do it. And when we are running it, if someone wants to do it themselves, absolutely, the book is kind of go read it and try to do it yourself. If someone wants us to do it for them, then absolutely, then the firm kind of helps them. But the basic premise is still the same, which is, in fact, the one most often, I need to mention this, I think, for the audience is, there's often misunderstood myth with user centricity, which is I call it the Henry Ford myth, where if I only asked the user what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse when he was trying to build Model T. The answer is, I think people get that completely wrong. You don't ask any user what they want. You observe them. You kind of track what it is. You don't go and ask a service advisor in a dealership What do you want? You observe that they are struggling for that loaner key. You observe that they actually are trying to figure out they have a part or not, and they then look across. And that's what you start observing, and you take notes on that. Because most times, many people in the process of doing it themselves, or users who are engaging, they themselves can articulate the problem. So what they feel is not what they say. And so you have to triangulate that, and then you have to kind of take that on, which is why I say you have to think like a military analyst. You're looking at data the way that others are not looking at, and then you correlate that. So anyway, long story short, I think that's basically the sense of what we trying to kind of put forward in the book. And when you do that, our fundamental belief is, and we have seen this so many times with our clients, that millions and billions of dollars gets unlocked because you just build that moat against competition, that you're just following the user and you're doing it, and many other folks don't even know where you're coming up with these ideas, and all you're doing is just making sure you're highly in tune with what's happening with the grassroots users of your system. In fact, there's a whole technique that I would just quickly share, and we call it the lead user technique, where we look at users using your product or system in unintended ways. And if we can go and find that out, that's $1 million and $1 billion opportunities that came up. I was working for a large company, and we were seeing that we were used to we had a web meeting product in my prior company, and we would observe that a lot of doctors are using it for talking about the patients and looking at collaborating with others. But most times it's not HIPAA compliant. So they're doing it because that's the right thing for the patient, but it may not always be HIPAA compliant. But what if now we created a HIPAA compliant product? That's $1 billion addressable opportunity. And that's where you start looking at observe your user, and then automatically everything comes together. So again, a long-winded answer, but hopefully that kind of addresses the issue itself.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love what you said. Don't go by what they say, observe what they do, and follow that trend. And I will say this, that in my career I've had the opportunity to work on many products, many innovations, and it was simply by watching the customer. It wasn't because I was super brilliant and had all these great ideas. It was literally just watching them work, having them verbally process how much they hated certain things and why. And I think that that's what leads you to the innovations. And so sometimes we make it so much harder than it needs to be. We think we need to go away for 2 days and all lock ourselves in a room together. We actually need to go spend time with our customer. We need to sit with them. We need to observe them and really understand them to make a mark on product development. So this has been really cool. I've enjoyed this.
Absolutely. Same here. Likewise, Dan.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Likewise. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.